Hello ladies and gentlemen and movie lovers of all kind, and welcome back to the channel. As always, I am your host, Brett Murphy, and for today's video I have a brand new Godlike 2 Not Quite, which is just essentially my own personal version of a tier video for you all. And I am going to be looking at all 29 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. So it's no secret that Thor Love and Thunder, the fourth solo Thor movie, releases in theaters this weekend. Which, believe it or not, from a very small, humble beginning, is now the 29th movie in a shared cinematic movie universe. Pretty crazy and hard to believe, I know, but here we are. And since I've already done many rankings involving the MCU, but I realized I have never done one of these tier videos for the MCU movies, so why not do that instead and mix things up a little bit. A couple of quick notes before we start. Firstly, you will likely have noticed that I have not included the Disney Plus original shows on here, and that's because Ms. Marvel is wrapping up in just a few days, so I figured I'll probably put that off and then maybe do a ranking of all of the shows just on their own, since I haven't done that in a little while for that, and then maybe another few months down the road when we get, more movies and more shows, maybe I'll revisit this Godlike 2 Not Quite tier list and incorporate the shows in there then and do one giant one. But for today, once again, we will be looking at just the movies. So speaking of the movies, this isn't going to be little mini reviews for all 29 of these movies. I'm not going to be spending, 2, 3, 4 minutes talking about each one's, all the positives and negatives. I'm just going to put them in one of the tiers and then just kind of explain while they're there very, very briefly, and then move on to the next one, because I don't want to be here all day doing this and you don't want to be there all day watching this. I would also like to say too that at the end of the tier video, once I'm done placing all the movies into all the tiers, I will be incorporating my ranking as well, so you will also be getting my 29 MCU movies ranked from worst to best at the tail end of the video. So if you're interested in just seeing that part, well, you can skip to that if you'd like. It's not going to help me out very much. I would definitely appreciate if you watch the whole thing, but just as a side note, my ranking will be included in this video as well. Before I hop into the actual tier video itself, I just wanted to let you all know that I have an entire playlist dedicated to all of my Godlike 2 Not Quite tier videos. So be sure to check that out, and I guarantee you'll find something you like. And so without further ado, let's start tiering it up. Okay, so first things first, as always, I like to start off these tier videos by going through my tiers because, as you may have noticed, the names are a little bit different from the usual just simple letters or numbers or whatever else, right, that people normally do. I just made them more me, so I like to go through them right quick, just for those of you who maybe have never seen one of my Godlike 2 Not Quite videos, or maybe you're new to the channel, so it just kind of, refresher for those who have been here, and just a little update for those of you who haven't been. So the very top one there, replacing the G or S tier, is the Godlike tier. Replacing the traditional A tier is the Awesome Sauce tier. Replacing the B tier is Good as Gold. Replacing the C tier is Quite Alright. Replacing that D tier is Super Meh. And finally, replacing that F slash, bottom tier is, well, rock bottom. And I always like to make note of this too. When I do these tier videos, the tiers are based on what I am tiering. So what I mean by that is, if I put one of these movies in the rock bottom, it doesn't necessarily mean that that is like an F grade movie or a 0 out of 10 or a 1 out of 5 or something like that. It just means it's rock bottom for that particular tier list. So whatever ends up in that rock bottom category for the MCU, I just believe it's the worst that the MCU has to offer, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad movie, because probably the lowest score I would give an MCU movie, in all truthfulness, is like a 6.5 or a 7. I really do enjoy them all, but in terms of the MCU, what is rock bottom for these 29 movies is essentially what I mean by that. Okay, so let's hop right into it. The very first movie we have up on our list is the first Ant-Man movie, and I'll start off with a Good as Gold, a B tier for the first Ant-Man movie. I think it's absolutely hilarious. Do I feel it's a little small scale? Yeah, just a tiny bit. I think that they put Ant-Man's powers to good use, and I think they were translated well to the screen. I think Paul Rudd was perfectly casted, Evangeline Lilly was great, Michael Douglas was great too. The villain was pretty weak, but the supporting cast, aside from that group there, like Michael Pena, his storytelling, all that stuff was fantastic. So Ant-Man, absolutely hilarious. The story is pretty much just a retelling of the first Iron Man, and the villain is pretty lackluster. So that's where I kind of stand with the first Ant-Man movie. Ant-Man and the Wasp, well, go right next to it. It's pretty much the same thing. Not the same story, but I just feel the exact same about it. I like having Wasp in there. I like her abilities once again. Paul Rudd, Evangeline Lilly, they make a fantastic duo. They were both very well casted. The action's great because that was one of my biggest fears heading into the first Ant-Man movie was how are these powers going to look on the screen? How are they going to look in this universe? And they look absolutely exceptional and even better here in the sequel. Again, I think the action is solid enough. I think the comedy works well. I think the casting was really good. But once again, very, very severely lackluster-like villains. So Ant-Man and the Wasp and Ant-Man, I think, are just about on par with one another. The first Avengers movie, it was make or break, ladies and gentlemen, make or break. If this first Avengers movie, after the buildup of the, 4 years of buildup, if this didn't pay off, if this didn't go huge, then we probably wouldn't have an MCU that, the one that we know and love today. One of my favorite theater experiences of my entire lifetime, probably in the top 3. I still remember being there opening night with my friends at the time in 2012, and it was incredible. It really was. It exceeded every single one of my expectations. Yes, I know that, we're not supposed to necessarily like the director anymore, and I'm not saying necessarily like if everything that's been said about him is true, then yeah, there's good reason to not very much like Joss Whedon. But that doesn't mean that we can't love and appreciate this movie for everyone else that was involved in the project and poured their heart and soul to it and gave us this absolutely amazing movie. So, the first Avengers, I absolutely adore it. Now we have Avengers Age of Ultron. That's actually going in the awesome sauce tier. I honestly probably could have put it in the godlike tier. Fun fact about me, Avengers Age of Ultron is, I think as of right now, in my top 10 for the MCU, which is like a massive hot take apparently. I guess a lot of people don't really, don't like Age of Ultron too much for some reason. I don't know why. I think the action and the visuals and all the typical stuff that was people praised in the first Avengers, I think it's very much so present here. We get a few new heroes / villains, kind of, right, with Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. We get James Spader as Ultron, which is like probably top 3 to top 5 MCU villains for me. And yeah, I really think that it's pretty much just, it's a sequel to the first Avengers movie. It is a, sequel that's arguably just as good. So yeah, I've never understood the hate for it because I personally don't hate it. I absolutely adore it, and I would I'd probably right now still put Age of Ultron in my top 10 for the MCU. I really do. I love it, and I don't understand any of the hate for it, honestly. Avengers Infinity War, of course, that's also going in the godlike tier. That movie is exceptional. It's phenomenal. It's truly fan-freaking-tastic. All this build-up to get to this, it's pretty much just a Thanos movie, and it works. Josh Brolin absolutely kills it, gives the performance of a lifetime. Easily the MCU's best villain, one of the best comic book movie villains, one of the best movie villains in general ever. It's big, it's bombastic, we're fighting on multiple fronts, we got stuff going on in Wakanda, we got stuff going on a distant planet called Titan, which was Thanos' home world. We got a bit of everything in here, and one of the most jaw-dropping, surprising, blow-your-mind endings in movie history. So, Infinity War obviously going in the godlike tier, and right next to it, I'll just keep going, Avengers Endgame. That's probably in my top 3 to 5 favorite movies of all time. Not just in the MCU. It's my favorite MCU movie. It is my favorite theater experience of my lifetime. I laughed, I cried, I cheered. Everything. I felt every single emotion on the known human spectrum while watching this movie, and I still do with each and every rewatch. I simply adore it. Not only did it meet my every single expectations, but it actually exceeded the hype. It exceeded the expectations. It exceeded everything. It was everything I could have hoped for and so much more. So Endgame, of course, going in that godlike tier, obviously. Captain America, the First Avenger, actually for me is also going in awesome sauce. That might be another controversial one. It's one of the lowest rated MCU movies. A lot of people put it in their mid to latter half of their MCU ranking. Not for me. I'm a huge sucker for World War II movies. I think this one did everything right. It had the elements of World War II. It had the campier and cornier elements from those like original Captain America comics and things like that, while also having some really grounded stuff, some really gritty stuff, and some really good moving stuff. Hugo Weaving as Red Skull, I think, worked well. Chris Evans proved exactly why he was casted as Captain America right out of the gate. It gave us Peggy Carter, and then, of course, it ends by setting him up for the Avengers because he ends up in, well, the future for him, but the present for us. So I love everything about this first Captain America movie, and I don't see why more people don't, truthfully. Captain America the Winter Soldier, yeah. Also going in godlike. Apparently we're getting all the godlike ones out of the way right away. It's so good because it was so different at the time for the MCU. It was a Captain America movie, of course, at its core. There were still a lot of the traditional superhero tropes and things like that in there. But really, it was a spy espionage thriller, and it was darker than anything else we had gotten in the MCU at that point. It was more serious. It had more twists and turns and big reveals. It had some really exquisite action in there, and then of course you have Bucky introduced as the Winter Soldier. That relationship kind of grows a bit more between Cap and Black Widow. So I think all the moving pieces in there, they moved in the right direction and everything went really well. And of course this was the first one directed by the Russo bros, who went on to direct the 2 movies sitting beside the Winter Soldier right now, which are also in godlike, and the Russo bros actually directed the next one going in the godlike tier as well. Yeah, all 4 Russo brothers directed MCU movies are in that godlike tier because Captain America Civil War was my favorite MCU movie until Avengers Endgame came out. What I personally love about Civil War, and that is the thing that a lot of people like to complain about, is that it's just basically a mini Avengers movie, but I think it works because the tension there, because the rift between the heroes, because you either fall on Team Cap or Team Iron Man. But what I've always loved most about Captain America Civil War is that it brings things down to a human level. It grounds the story, because the whole reason behind this rift between the heroes and all of this happening is because the government wants them to take responsibility for the collateral damage that, comes with them saving the world and saving the city and things like that. So that moment when this new whatever is introduced to them, the Sokovia Accords or whatever it is, where we see the cell phone footage and the security camera footage and things like that of the people that are on the ground level while these heroes are flying around and buildings are being destroyed and things are blowing up and stuff, it really has stuck with me since I saw this opening night in 2016. It's very impactful. Again, it kind of brings that groundedness back to this larger than life, otherworldly movie universe. So I will always appreciate Civil War for that. And then again, you have the airport scene and things like that, and the acting is phenomenal the whole way through. So hell yeah, Civil War, godlike. Captain Marvel, super meh. Yeah, I think I'll put that in super meh for now. I don't think it's quite in rock bottom. I mean, I could put it in rock bottom. It's just forgettable. It is the most run-of-the-mill MCU movie. It really is. I think that Brie Larson is great as Captain Marvel. I think she's good, but the villain is so generic. The plot is pretty basic, pretty dull, nothing new. The action is just kind of what you've come to know and expect from the MCU at this point, so it's not necessarily bad, it's just generic. Like, when people criticize the MCU movies for all being the same, my mind just immediately goes to Captain Marvel, because Captain Marvel kind of feels like the general complaints about the MCU all wrapped up into one movie. It's kind of just generic, a little bit basic across the board. Not necessarily bad, because there's nothing in it aside from the villain that I think is really bad. I think it's just all really just run-of-the-mill. So super meh, I think that kind of suffices for that one. The next one, Eternals. This will be another controversial one, but I'll put that in good as gold. I'm a huge fan of Eternals. I was expecting to go in and hate it because the reviews really weren't good, and I was like, oh my god, this is going to be the first MCU movie that I am bored in. It's going to be the first MCU movie that I just don't care for, and I left the theater going, I have no idea where all of these mixed and negative reviews came from, because I had a blast. I don't know if I was back to doing reviews at that point or not, but I gave the movie an 8 out of 10, which is, an 8 equals great, and I thought it was good. Even though it's good as gold, I gave it an A for great. I thought it was a really good movie. I thought that there was, a lot of variety in our heroes' abilities, and I thought the abilities were showcased very well. We have my all-time favorite speedster on screen, and although the villains weren't necessarily great, it's by far the most visually stunning movie in the entire MCU. With 29 movies and multiple shows, that's a pretty big compliment. There are many breathtaking shots in here. The action is absolutely amazing. And again, it's a little bit long, short, 2.5 hours was a bit of a stretch, but there was a lot of ground to cover, and I think they covered it very well. And I really do personally hope to see a sequel for Eternals, even though I highly doubt we're going to get one, but wishful thinking, I guess, folks. Guardians of the Galaxy, yeah, the first one, going right in that godlike tier too. Another top 10 MCU movie. James Gunn took a group of, at the time, a lot of people might not remember this, back in 2014, because that's almost a decade ago. These were like not even B-list. These were like C, D-list heroes. Like the Guardians of the Galaxy, they were known to people in the comic world, but if you just knew the MCU or the cartoons or things like that, you really had no idea who the Guardians of the Galaxy were. He took these heroes and he turned them into household names. He turned them into global phenomenons. This movie not only got rave reviews, it blew up at the box office, and now everybody knows and loves the Guardians of the Galaxy, and it's all thanks to this cast, this crew, and director James Gunn for bringing these characters into the limelight and giving them the justice that they always deserve, because they're very layered characters, and the actors chosen to portray these characters, to bring them to life, there isn't a single bad casting choice out of them, and I'm so stoked for Guardians 3. Guardians 2 is a bit lower. This one has grown on me. When I first saw it in theaters, I was like, it was just okay, but as I've watched it multiple times, I've realized that it wasn't trying to replicate what the first Guardians did. It was trying to bring things closer to home. It's a lot more character focused. It's a lot more about the relationships that they have with one another. It's a lot more about finding yourself and loving each other and things like that. So there is still some great action in here. There's still some just bonkers, insane, crazy, awesome visuals in here too. But it really is more of a character piece than the first one, and that's something that I've grown to appreciate more over time. Do I think it is as good? No, absolutely not. There's a pretty big divide there, a pretty big rift between the godlike tier and the good as gold tier, but it has definitely grown on me, and it's a very enjoyable movie. The Incredible Hulk, right next to Captain Marvel in the super meh tier. I don't think it's a bad movie at all. No, Edward Norton, I don't think he would have fit in with this cinematic universe. I think Mark Ruffalo was perfect for that. But as this solo Hulk movie, it works. I like the extra focus on Bruce Banner and him dealing with the Hulk and dealing with trying to control his anger and things like that. I think Abomination is an awesome villain. I think their final throwdown is one of the best throwdowns in the MCU, if you can really count it as part of the MCU. I mean, I know it technically is, but it really isn't at the same time. But regardless, that throwdown, man, that will get your subwoofer absolutely moving, shaking the whole house. It's awesome. It's bombastic. Is the movie great all the way through? No, it's a bit dull. It's a bit tired. It's okay. But I do love, again, that extra focus on Banner, and I do think that the action is very Hulk-esque. The first Iron Man movie is going to be, I'm trying to compare. It's a tough one. I think I might put in Godlike. I think I might, because it could go in awesome sauce or godlike. It's kind of riding that fine line between the two, but the reason I will bump it up to godlike is because it's the one that started it all. I know I said earlier about Avengers, like all the success of the MCU was riding on that, which it was, because the purpose that Iron Man and these other solo movies in Phase 1 served was to lead to the Avengers to be the next big thing, which of course it was, but none of it would have happened at all. We would not have gotten an Iron Man 2, we would not have gotten anything else except for the Incredible Hulk, because that only came out like a month later. We wouldn't have gotten anything else if this first Iron Man movie flopped, if the reviews weren't as good as they were, if it didn't make as much money as it was, if it didn't receive the praise for Robert Downey Jr. in the lead role, for Jon Favreau's direction. If it was not what it is and as good as it is, we would not have everything we are talking about today, and that's what bumps it into the godlike tier. When I go back and watch it now, I appreciate the simpler times, but I also see the flaws and the cracks a little bit more, so that's where I was kind of like, maybe it's awesome sauce, but because of how important of a movie it is to the universe and really just the whole theater-going experience that we have today right now, these blockbuster movies that come out all the time and stuff, all of that really goes back to that first Iron Man movie, so I have to give credit where credit is due. Iron Man 2, however, is, I would probably say, quite alright. It'll be our first quite alright one. It is in the lower portion of my MCU ranking, but I have bumped it up a little bit over time because of how much I enjoy it. I have a lot of nostalgia for it. I remember seeing it back when it first came out at a good friend of mine's birthday party when we were all kids. I had a blast with it then, and although the story isn't quite as strong, and the villain, aside from Sam Rockwell, who's great as Justin Hammer, I mean Mickey Rourke's villain, isn't as strong, and it's just not necessarily as good as the first Iron Man movie, or the third, which we'll be talking about next. I have a lot of nostalgia for it, and I can throw this movie on any time and have a good time because the action is just great. It really is, and there's a lot of fun to be had. I like Tony's journey through this movie. I think the comedy works really well and such. Is it flawed? For sure. Maybe if I watched it now, like if I went and just started the MCU from right now and watched all the movies, it might be a bit lower, but because I have that nostalgia factor for it and I always have so much fun watching it, I can't put it in the bottom 2 tiers. I enjoy it too much. Here's another one that might throw people off a little bit. Awesome Sauce. Another hot take from ya boy. I love Iron Man 3. There could be, if I did this list tomorrow, I could potentially swap Iron Man 1 and Iron Man 3. There is a hot take for you. There are definitely times when watching the Iron Man movies that I actually consider Iron Man 3 to be better than the first Iron Man movie. There may be storytelling elements that are stronger in the first Iron Man movie, but I do find the third to be more entertaining. I think the action goes bigger and better. I love Aldrich Killian, Guy Pearce as our villain. I like the whole Extremis plot line. I like the stuff with Happy. I like the handling of Tony's PTSD, knowing that there are aliens out there and that the world is very vulnerable to attack. I like that it's like Christmas themed. I always watch this at Christmas time. I think it's a Christmas movie personally. So I really do think that it is on par with that first Iron Man movie. And like you just saw, I almost put that first Iron Man movie in the awesome sauce category. The only reason I would put it above in the godlike tier right now and above Iron Man 3 is because of how important it is to this universe. You know, its success created all that we are talking about today. But as for an actual movie, 1-to-1, I think they're pretty much on par, and that is a very hot take because there are a lot of Iron Man 3 haters out there, and since we're talking about it, I love the Mandarin twist. I think it's great that he is just a pawn, a puppet, and that's all being worked behind the scenes and stuff like that. I think that stuff was exceptional, and I really enjoyed it personally, but I know a lot of people aren't going to agree with that one. Black Panther, I'll also put in awesome sauce. This one is tough. I haven't watched this in a little while now. I actually haven't been able to bring myself to watch it since Chadwick Boseman's passing. Will I? Yeah, absolutely. To honor the man, the myth, the legend, of course. I love Chadwick Boseman. I was crushed to find out about his passing and everything that he'd been through in the past few years leading up to his death. But speaking of it strictly as a movie, when I left the movie theater, I didn't really understand the hype too much. I was like, yeah, it was good, but it was pretty generic. It was all right. Like, I liked it, but I didn't love it. But after numerous rewatches, and this is before Chadwick's passing, it has just steadily grown on me into what I believe to be a great movie, or an A-tier movie. I think that Michael B. Jordan is easily one of the MCU's best villains. Again, one of the best comic book movie villains out there. Chadwick Boseman perfectly personifies the Black Panther character. I love all the supporting cast as well, too. I love Danai Gurira. I love Lupita Nyong'o. I love Forrest Whitaker in there a little bit as well. I love my guy Andy Serkis as Ulysses Claw. I love Letitia Wright. I think the cast is great. Oh, Martin Freeman's in there too. Good old Bilbo Baggins. The movie, aside from some CGI, for the most part looks fantastic. Wakanda is what dreams are made of. I think that being brought to life and all the African culture pumped in there is just, it works wonders for the movie. The soundtrack is great. The score is great. The action, although sometimes it does feel a little too artificial, for the most part is pretty solid. So overall, yeah, Black Panther is really the complete package. And it just continues to grow on me. And I'm hoping to get around to rewatching it at some point soon. But I just know that I'm going to absolutely bawl like a baby when I do. It's really going to be tough. But yeah, awesome sauce for Black Panther. Shang-Chi or however you pronounce it. I know everyone kind of says it differently. I'll go good as gold. I think looking at it, it could go awesome sauce, but I'll leave it in good as gold for now. I've only seen it the one time, which was in theaters, and I think almost everything about it works well. I love the Legend of the Ten Rings. I love Tony Leung, I believe that's how you pronounce it, as our villain, as the real Mandarin. I love Simu Liu as Shang-Chi. He's arguably my new favorite MCU hero. He's charming, he's charismatic, he's funny, he's very down-to-earth and relatable. The action here is just crazy good. The martial arts are out freaking standing. Yes, in the final act, it does sort of delve into that traditional, giant CGI army, giant CGI monster, and that takes away from it, because I feel like the rest of it was really good. I really do feel like that final battle could have just been between Shang-Chi and his father, and that would have been far more dramatic and far more epic and worked better for the movie. So yeah, there are still some flaws, but not only is the movie visually pleasing, the action in it, again, is just absolutely awesome. I'm saying absolutely way too much in this video, but nevertheless, and I think there's a lot of good things going for it. I bumped it down because when looking at those movies above it, I've seen those movies all many times, and I still love them just as much. So I'm kind of waiting to see, unless the movie blows me out of the water like Endgame when it first came out, if I think it was like just good or just really good or even great. I don't quite think it's going to go into those awesome sauce or godlike tiers. It has to truly blow my mind, and I have to simply adore it through and through for it to be a new movie ending up in those tiers, because these movies in my mind have stood the test of time. They have stood through the rewatch tests. I have yet to rewatch Shang-Chi, so that's why it goes in good as gold for today. Spider-Man Homecoming, also good as gold. I think the Spider-Man Home trilogy, the MCU Spider-Man outings, they have grown on me too steadily over time. When I first saw them, I'm like, yeah, they were just okay. Like, they were good. Like, they don't come anywhere near close to the Raimi trilogy, or at least the first two movies. I also am a huge fan and a sucker for the first Amazing Spider-Man movie. Even those two, the Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2, have grown on me a little bit. But now, after we have now the full trilogy with No Way Home, I think it wraps everything up nicely and has actually done the magical work of elevating the previous two, which includes Homecoming. So, good as gold. I don't think it's quite in the awesome sauce tier, but it definitely has worked its way up the ladder a little bit with the passing of time. Far From Home, pretty much the same thing as Homecoming. It's similar but opposite. A lot of my gripes with Homecoming is that, like, Tom Holland is wonderful as, you know, Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man. They couldn't have casted anyone better. I really believe that. Michael Keaton is magnificent as the Vulture. Iron Man's inclusion, I mean, people made a big fuss about it, like he's always Iron Man Jr. and this and that. I don't see it. If I was a kid growing up in the world of the Avengers and I had superhero abilities, hell yeah, I'd want to be an Avenger. Hell yeah, I would love Iron Man and look up to him as much as Peter Parker does in this movie. But what I like about it too is that, like, even though he was in the marketing everywhere, he had like 8 minutes of screen time in like a 2-hour and 15-minute movie or something like that. So I don't see the complaints. But nevertheless, I think that the Spidey stuff is great. I think that the Vulture stuff is great. I just think that the movie's a little too small scale. We don't really get to explore New York all that much. We don't get any of these big Raimi-esque sequences where he's, you know, just things that you remember. You know what I mean? It's just a little bit forgettable with its scale, with its story. Simple, humble beginnings, I guess. It is what it is. Far From Home did the opposite. It, for the first time ever, took Spider-Man out of New York, took us to Europe, but there's just still little gripes I have with it. Mysterio, just like Vulture, Jake Gyllenhaal, knocked it out of the park, one of the MCU's best villains, for sure. But I just think that the final act with the drones, although it can be badass at times, it is just really CGI heavy, and it doesn't always look that great, and I feel, again, it just feels a bit too artificial, in my opinion, at times. I like the lesson that Peter learns here. I like that he's growing past and beyond the shadow of Tony Stark, and I like that the relationship blossoms between him and this version of MJ. There's a lot of good in here. Of course, you could have seen the Mysterio twist coming from a mile away, and I never in a million years, even in this universe with all the technology that they have, would ever believe that this whole drone illusion thing would ever actually work. It just doesn't make any sense to me, but for every gripe that I have, there's something else that I love, so good as gold seems to suffice. Now we have No Way Home, and boop, that too is going right in the godlike tier. No Way Home 2 has the distinct honor of being one of my top 3 favorite movie theater experiences of all time. Once again, just like Endgame, I laughed, I cried, I screamed, I cheered. It was awesome when we went to see it. Our theater had a bunch of people in Spider-Man suits. The whole crowd was erupting, exploding into cheers and screams and cries when Toby showed up, when Andrew showed up, and then all the little moments too, like Andrew saving MJ from falling, like Toby, you know, saying his lines and things like that. Everyone was just losing their minds every single time a new character popped up on screen, every single time there was a reference to the past movies, every single time something amazing happened. It was really just, it encapsulated everything that I love about the MCU and everything I love about the theater experience and everything I love about being a fan of movies and being a part of this kind of community of movie lovers and whatnot. So No Way Home, it delivered on pretty much everything. I have a few small gripes with it, like I hate how Sandman and Lizard are kind of reduced to just like glorified thugs. Like they're not their former selves, that's for sure. Sometimes I think there's a bit too much going on in that final act that you can't really focus on all of the cool stuff at once. I have little gripes with it, but for the most part, I think it's an outstanding movie, truly exceptional, a work of art, one might say. I had high hopes going into it, and it really did go beyond my hopes, beyond the hype, beyond my expectations. It really was everything I could have hoped for, wished for, and dreamed for, wrapped up into one nice, neat little 2.5-hour Christmas-themed package, and I cannot wait for the next Spider-Man trilogy to see where his journey goes next. Like I said earlier, when talking about the first two ones, this movie made me go back and appreciate the full journey and enjoy those first two Spider-Man movies even more. So props to them for being able to do that as well. Now we have the first Doctor Strange, and that will also go in the good as gold tier. I think it is still one of the most visually mesmerizing and kind of trippy movies we have in the MCU. Arguably the trippiest, craziest movie we have in the MCU. The visuals in here are really something different. They took everything that people said, like, oh, it looks like Inception, or it looks like this movie or that movie, and just times them by 10. There are some really wild sequences in here with buildings twisting and turning and ripple effects and the mirror dimension and all these other kind of universes that Doctor Strange travels through. The story itself is pretty alright. It's kind of your generic origin story. The villains aren't great, even though I love Mads Mikkelsen. His villain, Caecilius, is just okay. Dormammu was just a floating head that shows up for the last, 5 minutes. I understand there's a bit of controversy there, too, with the whitewashing of the Ancient One. But, I mean, Benedict Cumberbatch, a lot of people were campaigning for, Joaquin Phoenix to get the role, but no. Benedict Cumberbatch, just perfect. Perfect casting choice. That's something I should have mentioned throughout all of this. I really don't think that the MCU has ever made a bad casting choice. Maybe some of the supporting characters or minor characters, but all of their leading heroes, perfect casting. There isn't one bad casting choice. Robert Downey Jr., Chris Evans, Chadwick Boseman, Paul Bettany, Scarlett Johansson, Elizabeth Olsen, Evangeline Lilly, Brie Larson, Benedict Cumberbatch, Tom Holland, Simu Liu. Every single one of them, folks. All of the Guardians of the Galaxy. Every one. Perfect casting choice. They have not missed yet, unless I guess technically you count, again, some of the minor ones. At least when they were minor, like Iron Man 1 had Terrence Howard before we got good old Don Cheadle, because Don Cheadle to me is marginally better than what Terrence Howard did in the first Iron Man. But yeah, Benedict Cumberbatch was just yet another example of perfect casting. And now we move on to Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and oopsie, awesome sauce. Yep, that's one of them that really, really has stuck with me since I saw it in theaters just a couple of months ago. I do not understand the mixed to negative reviews for this one. This one has really, really struck a chord with me. Maybe it's because I'm a huge fan of Sam Raimi as a director and I can see his fingerprints all over this movie. Maybe it's because I loved Wanda as the villain. Maybe it's because I loved the visuals. Maybe it's because I loved, even though we didn't explore as much as we were hoping, the multiverse. We're expanding it a little bit. I know people went into this movie expecting, a multiverse of madness, traveling to all these different universes. They expected 110 cameos, but I really think that was just rumors and speculation, getting people to believe that we were going into something that it wasn't. This is still definitely a Doctor Strange movie, or really it's like a Doctor Strange and Scarlet Witch movie. I think both of them gave their best performances in the MCU yet. I think, again, Sam Raimi's fingerprints are all over here. I think that the horror elements in here worked wonders. I think that is visually striking. I love the color palette in here as well. I love the score in here. And I love the way that the story plays out. And I love Xochitl Gomez as America Chavez as our new hero, our new dimension jumping hero and things like that. So I think that it's a nice, sweet little story. It's 2 hours long. They kept the scale relatively small rather than blowing it out of the water, even though it did promise a multiverse of madness. But to me, pretty much every single thing in this movie worked. A lot of people aren't going to agree with that, but I do think it is better than the first Doctor Strange movie, and I do think it's better than everything that's listed below it, personally. So, the first Thor, I'll put it in super meh. I was just talking about the Thor movies because, Thor Love and Thunder just came out, and that's, what the big talk of the weekend is. The stuff on Asgard is great. I think Kenneth Branagh's direction in here is just super solid. Everything on Asgard is truly breathtaking and stunning, but it's everything else that I don't like. I don't like the whole fish out of water Thor story. Everything that takes place in this small town is really just kind of boring, a little bit dull, and it ruins the momentum that the movie had. I would have rathered a full-blown, basically realm-hopping story. I would have rathered we stayed out in Asgard, and I understand that they couldn't do that because we needed the Avengers to happen and yada yada, but him fighting the Frost Giants, Thor and his team fighting the Frost Giants, and then, you know, potentially starting a new war and things like that, and Loki's betrayal and all that stuff should have been the core focus in my mind, and that would have skyrocketed this movie to probably awesome sauce or good as gold at the very least. But because we spend so much time slowing things down and coming to Earth and having just, nothing really happens. It's just a slow, long, drawn-out tale. And that's what really irritates me, is that there's so much potential here, and it just kind of squandered it, in my humble opinion. Again, Hemsworth, though, perfect casting. Hiddleston, perfect casting. Anthony Hopkins, Idris Elba. And don't get me wrong, the people on Earth and the stuff that happens is still enjoyable enough. Natalie Portman's great. Kat Dennings is great. Stellan Skarsgård's great. And I understand, once again, that we needed this to happen, and it also introduced us to Hawkeye, which is something that a lot of people forget. But this is something that needed to happen to get us to the Avengers, and I get that. But that doesn't mean I have to like it. Thor: The Dark World is the rock bottom movie, and I think it's really going to be the only rock bottom movie on this list because it is my least favorite of the MCU. Again, I'd probably still score it a 6.5 because there still is good stuff in here. You know, you can't have Hemsworth as Thor and Hiddleston as Loki and all this other stuff, and the relationship that they have. That's the strongest element of that movie, is the dynamic between Thor and Loki and everything that they go through with Thor and Loki's mother dying. I love the design of the Dark Elves. I think they look really cool, really sleek. Are they put to good use? Absolutely not. There's a lot of lore there that's left unexplored. The villain is extremely underwhelming. The movie is just, the color palette is just kind of dark and dreary, a little bit drab, and it's not too exciting or anything like that. So there are still good elements in here, and, you know, call me an MCU or a Disney shill or an MCU fanboy or whatever, because I am. I love these movies. Hence why even the rock bottom for the MCU, I've still probably seen 4 or 5 times. It would score like a 6.5 out of 10, but I do believe that it is my least favorite, is what I'll say, of the MCU's offerings, for sure. Thor Ragnarok, going right up into that probably godlike tier. I'm like trying to count here to see how many I have. Yeah, I'd probably put Ragnarok in the godlike tier. I think that's probably my top 10 MCU movies. It is bright, it is colorful, it is zany, it is loud, it is extravagant, it is in your face, it is hilarious. Hella, probably top 3 to 5 MCU villains, one of my favorite comic book movie villains. I think that although Thor does get a bit more dumbed down here, it was a reinvention of the character, and a much needed reinvention of the character, because honestly he was quite boring in the first couple of Thor and Avengers movies. It's the next step of the evolution for him and for the Hulk as well. It introduced us to Valkyrie, it introduced us to Korg. There is a lot to love in here. Oh, don't forget Jeff Goldblum as the Grandmaster. So there's a lot to love. Sure, sometimes the jokes don't always land, and sometimes it does take away from the more emotional moments, but you cannot deny how beautiful this movie is, and some of those absolutely insane shots in there that are just truly breathtaking. There is so much to love, and Thor, you know, the whole what are you the god of again? And it's the god of thunder, and that awesome with the immigrant song kicking in, that epic scene where he's fighting all the bad guys, and then Surtur comes in, and the destruction of Asgard and stuff. There's a lot that goes on in here, and I really do love Ragnarok all the way through, front to back, start to finish. Thor Love and Thunder, yeah, sorry folks, I did not love Thor Love and Thunder. I'd actually probably score it the exact same as The Dark World. But the thing is that I scored for the opposite reason. Whereas Thor Love and Thunder is entertaining the whole way through and The Dark World is boring, it's such a mixed bag. Really what it comes down to is Love and Thunder is similar to Ragnarok, but it takes it a step too far, I think. I think they hit that sweet spot with Ragnarok. I feel like that the emotional moments are squandered in Love and Thunder. I think that the jokes don't land pretty much at all in Love and Thunder. I think that there is way too many, like, cringy, childish scenes. And I know that, like, the MCU, it's superheroes. Some people would argue it is at time meant for kids, but they are PG-13 movies and whatnot. And there's definitely stuff in here for adults and fans like myself. But there are definitely things in here that are, like, almost Spy Kid-esque. And I don't want to get into spoilers with it, but, you know, a lot of you probably know the scenes that I'm talking about. The story left a lot to be desired. There was so much left unexplained, so much that wasn't explored at all, and just a lot of goofy stuff that really I just did not connect with. So there were definitely moments in here where I'm like, is this my least favorite MCU movie? Is this gonna be the first one that I actually don't like? But thankfully, it is saved by a few things. The returning characters that you already love, like Thor, Valkyrie, Korg, they're just as lovable as ever, even if Thor is a bit more dumber than ever. But the real reason that this movie gets saved is because Jane Foster as the mighty Thor, Natalie Portman returning, and she is just phenomenal in this movie. And then arguably even better, I wouldn't say even better, I think I might have liked Portman about the same, we'll say, Christian Bale as Gore the God Butcher too, even though I wish he got more screen time. You can just tell this guy is having a blast. He's having the time of his life, being this freak, being this weirdo. He just chews up every single scene he is in. He's having so much fun here, and he really plays into this character's strengths. He plays into the more maniacal, insane side of things, and I had a blast every single time he is on screen. The movie gets infinitely better when him and Jane are on screen, so they really did save this movie from being in that rock bottom tier. They saved it from being my least favorite MCU movie, and they saved it from being my least favorite Thor movie as well. Last but certainly not least is Black Widow. Black Widow for me is a mixed bag. It was a mix of too little too late, but I also enjoyed what we got. Scarlett Johansson finally getting center stage, being the star of her own movie is great. Florence Pugh as Yelena Belova, arguably the best new addition to the MCU. I love David Harbour in this movie as well. Rachel Weisz is fantastic also. That family dynamic is really what saves this movie, because Taskmaster being one of the most well-known and hyped villains for the MCU, the fact that Taskmaster fell flat on her face and wasn't a very good villain at all, and the other guy, I can't even remember his name, but the guy that runs the Black Widow program, he sucked too. The villain wasn't great, I know, and this movie has been notorious since its release for having some scenes that have really bad CGI, and it kind of just sucks, right, because we know where the story goes next. It takes place in between the events of Civil War and Infinity War, and we know what happens with Black Widow's story, so we're not going to get a sequel. We already knew what happened to the character, so it just, again, it felt like that too little too late. There are elements in here I really do enjoy, but overall, it is kind of a dull viewing experience. It's okay. I'll watch it again, but it's definitely not going to be the top of my priority list. Typically, I do like to splice in a little ranking at the end here as well. I've noticed a lot more people doing this in their tier videos lately, kind of going through and ranking all of them at the very end as well, so I figured why not do the same. So basically the way it's going to work, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 in our godlike tier. So right now anyway, number 1 here being the Avengers, number 9 being Ragnarok, and then we move down. Number 10 would be Age of Ultron, and then same thing, this would be, what, 11, 12, 13, this would be 14 here, and then 15, you get the gist of it, and then the very bottom, 29, would be Thor the Dark World, which that's not going to change, so let's rearrange them a little bit here, folks, and we'll get this straightened away for you all. Probably do this, and then Infinity War, Avengers. Let's see, I'd probably bump No Way Home up here, probably, I would say. Infinity War there, Guardians there. I'd probably put Ragnarok here, maybe. Yeah, I'd probably do that. And then Age of Ultron would honestly probably stay there. I'd probably put, yeah, I think this awesome sauce tier is probably in order there. I'm looking at it again. I'd probably actually bump Doctor Strange ahead. And then Iron Man 3 and Captain America are probably fairly interchangeable. I'd probably actually put Iron Man 3 there. Ant-Man, I probably scooched down a little too low there. I apologize for that if I did do that. Ant-Man and the Wasp is better than that. Eternals is better than Ant-Man and the Wasp, in my humble opinion, if I can switch those around. Doctor Strange, let's see, Shang-Chi 2 would probably be better than those ones. Spider-Man, better than those, in my opinion. Far From Home, a little bit better than Homecoming. Guardians 2, better than Ant-Man. And then I'd probably say Doctor Strange there. Yep, Iron Man 2. Captain Marvel. Would I put Captain Marvel there? I'd probably do like Black Widow there, Thor Love and Thunder here, because it's like Thor Love and Thunder has higher highs than these other movies, but it also has lower lows. Honestly, I'm probably more likely to rewatch Thor Love and Thunder than I am these other movies. Captain Marvel, Thor there probably, or there maybe. Yeah, and then I'd probably say it looks something like that. If I actually sat down and really like molded over and kind of culled through these movies and then did a dedicated ranking, it might look a little bit different, but for today, this is what my ranking is going to look like, folks. So there you have it, my MCU movie tier list as well as ranking. And as always, back to me. So that is all for today's video, folks. Be sure to let me know down in the comments if you agree or disagree with which tier I put each movie in. While you're at it, feel free to let me know which tier you would have put each movie in, and don't forget to suggest what godlike to not quite tier video you'd like to see me do next. If you enjoyed that video, be sure to hit that thumbs up button, and if you'd like to see more content, consider subscribing to my channel and ringing that little bell icon, that way you can be notified about all of my latest uploads. And as always, stay safe, thank you so much for watching, and that's a wrap. Hey you, yeah you, if you made it this far, just know I appreciate you, and while you're here, consider hitting that subscribe button.